Good afternoon, everyone, and a warm welcome to this third session, actually, in Business Sweden's concept in Almedalen this year. First, in the morning, we visited China and India. Then we followed the sun over the globe, touched base in the Middle East and Europe, and now, obviously, the sun has risen over North America and Canada. So the theme for today is how to tackle changing conditions for sustainable business, visiting the whole globe. Really exciting, right? This seminar, I should remind you, is also recorded, and you can have a look afterwards, and you can also spread it in your organization afterwards, if you like to. Well, without further ado, I am extremely delighted to be able to introduce the distinguished panel who's going to join me both digitally and on the stage to discuss these very important and interesting topics. So, digitally, we will be joined by Vivian Gilman, who is the Vice President for Americas, representing Business Sweden. It will be Jeanette Ireqvist, who is the President for Ericsson in Canada. And physically here on stage, I will be joined by three gentlemen. It's Tobias Hansson, who is the President and CEO of Hitachi Energy Sweden. It's Masi Jasti, who is the Chief Financial Officer of SEB. And it's Thomas Olsson, who is the founding engineer at Einride. So I propose that the physical participants join me on stage and that we give a big hand to this distinguished panel. I mean, we have the local experts, we have the business representatives, we have the bank, we have all the prerequisites to have a really, really interesting conversation here on stage. I'm going to have a look. If you, gentlemen, just move a bit on my side here so that we can have a look at the digital participants as well. Welcome, Vivian. Do you hear me? Seems like. Could you say something? I hear you as well.
Good morning.
Perfect. And Jeanette, do you hear me?
I hear you loud and clear, Josephine. Thank you for having me.
Perfect, and I can hear you as well. So let's get started. We're actually going to start off. Masi, I think you can look at Patricia. She's sort of taking care of the setting here, so it's perfect. Ah, perfect. Very good indeed. So we're going to start off asking Vivian, I mean, being present in the Americas, covering it for Business Sweden, could you please just start off with a short, I mean, we're going to come back and touch base on the macro sentiment and everything as well, but just to start, touch and feel, what's going on in your market right now? The easy question, right?
Well, what we can see is that sustainability is finally a top priority in North America. We've been waiting on this for a while. Both the US and Canada have been lagging far behind Europe in terms of climate action. But in the past 2 years, we've seen investments in climate and green transition investments into unprecedented levels. First, in 2021, we saw the 1.2 trillion infrastructure investment and Jobs Act here in the US. And then with the IRA, with another 370 or so million dollars. And much of this is targeting the transport, energy, and manufacturing sector. So this is also a great fit with our Swedish companies. And we can see similar trends in Canada as well, and where they're actually implementing a second carbon tax just this Saturday. So there's a lot of pressure in the whole continent here. And I think if I say that one of the clear trends is climate action, protectionism is unfortunately the other. Many of the recent policies have a clear domestication agenda. Here we have the Made in America framework, the Buy American Act, the CHIPS Act, many others. And the aim with these are to grow the share of products and components that are being made in the US. And many Swedish companies are following suit.
Yeah, and talking about, sorry, can we just let Jeanette in, and I will come back to you just soon. Jeanette, representing one of Sweden's largest companies. I learned this week that you have been in Canada for 70 years. Not you personally, obviously, but Ericsson has been in the country present for 70 years. Any comments on the sort of macro sentiment that Vivian just described?
Oh, and thank you for pointing that out. No, I haven't been here for 70 years, so
it was obvious.
We'll see if I get to that.
Obvious.
We'll see if I get to that. But no, you're absolutely right. And I think that as Vivian was pointing out, it's been clear that North America has been lagging Europe and Sweden in many of these initiatives around sustainability, but also is catching up. And that's also, and I think that's what we're going to discuss today, why Swedish companies and the way we work and been working for many years. I mean, Ericsson was the first ICT telecom company that started reporting on sustainability targets. We have been using those scientific targets for many years, and that it goes across most of the Swedish companies. So we are bringing a wealth of knowledge to the Canadian market on what we can do, and we see those investments coming through. So I'm sure we'll talk more about what that means, but absolutely, we see the same trends here, and Canada is leaning in, and it's also putting pressure on specific industries. We'll talk about, I guess, maybe more on the manufacturing side. We have the automotive side. We look at transport. We're seeing also per industries how they are making some of these efforts, and where obviously the different companies from Sweden and others can really make impact on those goals.
Yeah, and I interrupted you, Vivian. Did you have one more pointer on the macro sentiment before we let the
No, I was just going to say actually that, I think that even if these policies are the protectionist policies, even if they are not necessarily targeting Western or Swedish companies, there is some definite consequential damages, and not least because kind of EU and Sweden doesn't have a free trade agreement with the US. But, and I'm sure we'll get to that later as well, but we do not see these same tendencies in Canada, who pride themselves of being open for trade. So all of these macro movements are definitely impacting Swedish companies.
That's good. Yeah, and that was a good point as well. This seminar is covering obviously North America and Canada. Sorry, Jeanette.
No, I was just going to say, adding to what Vivian was just saying, that the Canadian goods exporters are not subject to the Buy American requirement. So we have a different situation in Canada, which is, I guess, different or simpler to manage and handle from that point of view.
Thank you, and we're going to let you, Tobias, in. I'm just going to point out before you start that you are heading the Swedish operations at Hitachi Energy. So having said that, you have a large business operations going on in North America and Canada as well. And of course, you're here to comment on that, even though you're heading the Swedish operations. How does it look today?
No, but we've been present for many, many years, and thanks for having me as well. Super thrilling to be here on an exciting event. But we've been present in the state for many, many years. We have about 4,000 employees operating in North America, another 1,000 people in Canada next to, and then a total of some 10 manufacturing sites. So we have a strong local footprint in the States, and that has always been a part of the strategy, to be local, but at the same time also global. This type of mixture is always a part of the strategy and still moving forward.
And what do you foresee, what has happened the latest years in terms of prerequisites and opportunities and everything you can sort of have top of mind right now?
Yeah, no, but we've been present for many, many years in North America, and we've seen a massive amount of projects that we delivered and also exported from Sweden. We have a big site in Ludvika in Sweden where we do the niche products, for example, the HVDC, the high voltage direct current applications, and still a massive pipeline now moving ahead. And also now the new policy making is also driving that market even faster now moving forward. So we see quite an impressive pipeline of new products coming up.
So we're gonna talk obviously a lot about the green transition and the state aid, the big IRA pact coming out in the US, and I think I would love you, Masi, to start, reflect on that. But first, before you give us your sort of outlook on the US green transition and the financing part, could you just tell us briefly about the corporate business of SEB?
Yeah, well, so we're predominantly a corporate bank. We do universal banking in the Nordics as well as the Baltics, but we predominantly do corporate banking in all Nordic countries in Northern Europe as well. But we do follow our customers wherever they go. So 70% of our large corporate customers have a global franchise. So if they decide to go to the US or where it's going to be, we're going to follow them there. That's what we've done for many, many years. So that's our main footprint.
And of course, I mean, you are following the development in all the markets, politics, regulations, legislations. I guess your work is full of de-risking strategies. That's what you do as a CFO in a large bank. Have you in any way changed your assessments of customers and something new strategies connected to de-risking?
No, it's actually more about sort of taking more risks than de-risking, to be honest, because as a bank, when you assess a credit, you're very dependent on just looking at what are the expected cash flows of this company. But when you're in a transition, we know that there are sort of companies that have a legacy business and they have to transform that to a new business. You don't have any historical numbers to sort of use to try to predict the future. So you have to make an assumption about, so what does this transition mean if you're doing something sustainable? It's much more difficult to sort of predict those cash flows, but then we want to be part of that transition, so we have to make predictions, but we know that they are not as good as our historical predictions. So it's actually more of a taking more risk to be part of something we think is necessary for society rather than de-risking.
And speaking of which, Thomas, representing one of these amazing new high-tech companies, not having a long series of numbers from history, but definitely having the future sort of shining through your face.
Yeah.
How do you see upon the North American market?
Well, we took the decision pretty early on to move there. We pretty early on also got investors out of the Bay Area initially. But since then, we've added more. I guess in the last few rounds, we've added large American entities like Capital Group, Soros Capital, but also more international capital like Temasek and others, who of course see this trend. It's a huge wave. The IRA is just a sign of it, but it's began some time ago. We are now working with some of the largest companies in America, helping them transition all their road freight to sustainable freight. And that's a huge task that's going to take a lot of time. And we're driving a new business model to enable this transition. So we're making installations like the largest charging site for commercial freight in the Western Hemisphere, basically the largest we know of. And we're right now live in 12 states already. So we've grown super fast. And that trend is just accelerating.
And from what I hear you saying, you have no plans on sort of not expanding in the North Americas. Seems like you just started.
I think what's actually great about the recession, if you can call it that, is that a lot of companies are forced to reevaluate their plans. And they need to rethink if what they are doing is actually working because, well, now with the interest rates, it's a different ballgame out there. And suddenly there's a lot of opportunities for us to come in and, show what we can do. And hence, we're getting a lot of incoming traffic that way. So I think that's why it's rather just accelerating than anything else. And I think in a Swedish context or a European context, we sometimes see America as not having sustainability as top of mind. But many of these global companies, they have targets for 2030, 2035, 2040 that they see that they need to fulfill.
And someone's going to need to help them to fulfill their goals.
And that's exactly right, because they don't know how today. There aren't companies out there providing them with solutions they need. And that's where a new kind of companies need to come up.
And we're going to talk about what you need to understand and what you need to know to really grasp those opportunities. But I just want to ask you, Vivian, the picture that Thomas now is painting, is that something that you can sort of see in other companies, Swedish companies in the region right now?
Yeah, for sure. And I think also the industry that Thomas is in with kind of the AV and electrification is definitely one of the big trends and where we see a lot of opportunities also for Swedish companies. I would say that the EV industry is actually one of those that is where there is a bigger need to also de-risk because there's a lot of those made in America type regulations that are targeting the EV industry, both with the vehicles and the components and the batteries. And so that's a real risk that a lot of companies need to kind of consider. But then on the other hand, despite these kind of risk factors, the EV sector sees tremendous opportunity. Massive investments in e-mobility across all of the different transport types, as well as in the battery field, where we currently see this boom in large-scale battery cell plants or gigafactories, both mainly in the US, but we also see a couple of these really big investments in Canada. And I can also mention in related news, a Canadian investment management company, IMCO, actually just last week invested $400 million in our Swedish battery producer, Northvolt. So it all ties together.
It all ties together, that's true. Jeanette, if I ask you, I mean, with long history in Canada for Ericsson, how has the prerequisites changed over time doing business in the region, and what's to keep in mind going forward?
That's a good question, and I'm not quite sure if it's easy to make predictions. So I think that the way Ericsson approaches the business, and I think some of you touched on it, it's really the longevity of the business. So as you say, we've been here for 70 years. Ericsson has been one of the top 10 investors in R&D here. We have 3,000 employees here, amongst where 80% of those are in research and development here, and we continue to grow. We just announced close to $500 million of an additional investment for the next coming 5 years. And I think that with Swedish companies like Ericsson doing that in critical areas, we talked about now some of the areas here already on EV and transport and those areas. Here we're talking about telecommunication, which obviously is the basic infrastructure for them to actually drive Canada forward. And with Swedish companies being here for such long-term business and continuing growing and investment, that creates credibility. So even if, and I think that Thomas said, even if there are good and bad times, and when there are bad times, sometimes you lean in. And the way we have leaned in with announcing those further investments here going forward is showcasing our commitment to Canada and really how we will grow and how we see that growth. And I think that the reason why it is easier also for some of our Swedish companies in both US and Canada, and especially here in Canada, the Swedish culture, mentality, ways of working are very similar. I mean, as a Swede moving to Canada, I felt home very, very quickly. We have the same values, etc. They are, if possibly, even more polite and kind, I think, here in Canada than in Sweden. I think that's, they're going even a step further. But it's a very easy fit. I think even if you come as a big or a smaller Swedish company trying to establish yourself in Canada, that culture fit makes it so much easier. And also the history of Swedish company being successful and having those long-term investments here is giving us, even further advantages.
Looking at a company who hasn't been 70 years yet in the region, is there something that you can recognize from her here? What you need to understand? What prerequisites are crucial for your continuous expansion?
I think it's interesting building a company with one culture spanning both continents. Because I think sometimes, at least us moving there and kind of starting up everything up, we maybe believe that cultures are more similar in some ways. But then you kind of realize that it's actually different in a lot of ways. And building that all up has been a big thing for us. But building a culture that can scale has been critical. But I guess other things, many things works differently and in so many small ways. So it's even hard to go into details. But I guess we're able to speak with leaderships in some of these companies and take decisions that are more far-reaching and wider than what we'd see in a European context. So the way you need to sell is different in many ways. And you need to be a little bit more assertive than maybe what you have to do in a North European context to get things done. But there's also a whole different way of just moving fast. Consensus isn't that important, but the results are. And I think that's something where we can learn a lot and that we're trying to integrate more in our culture as well. But yeah, it's been a super wild ride to just scale out this fast.
And you just started, right? So it's going to be amazing to follow you.
Yeah, I think we're going to be announcing more contracts. I guess we got in Maersk as an investor a few years ago, and with that, we pretty soon afterwards signed the largest deal for sustainable freight up to that point. And I guess now, even outside of the US, other regions are kind of following suit on that. So we signed this deal in the UAE now with the equivalent capacity of about 2,200 electric trucks, which is pretty massive. But I'm hoping to announce something even better soon in North America. So.
you need to continue to follow them to see what that could be. Turning back to you, Tobias, I mean, sometimes when you read the papers, you can have the sense that there are some sort of zero-sum game going on, subsidies in the EU market, large state aids targeting green transition in the US. Is there a conflict here, or how should one understand large foreign contracts and how it's good for Sweden, to just be super blunt?
Yeah, it's a blunt one. No, but I don't see that, at least in our segment, happening. I mean, we're doing both simultaneously here. We're investing locally in the footprint in the North America. So we recently announced that we're going to expand and invest in our factory in South Boston. We also recently invested in our factory in Jefferson City, and we will continue to spread and strengthen the footprint locally. That's a clear, important piece in the strategy. But then at the same time, we're also expanding and strengthening the footprint here in Sweden. So, for example, in Ludvika, up in Dalarna, we announced that we're going to hire a lot of people, we're going to invest a lot of money in our factories, and that is also a part of serving the North American market moving ahead. So I think we are doing both here, and looking at what's happening in the North American market, it's clear that it's a growing, it's a tremendous growth on the market. So I think we need to be able to do a bit of both here moving forward.
Going back to the bank, Masi, I mean, there are huge opportunities, obviously, in this green transition, all new technique, all new energy solutions coming up. And of course, these companies need money, needs to be financed. How should one understand what's important to do when you go to the bank to be able to expand, for example, in the North Americas or in Canada?
Well, it depends on what kind of capital you want. So depending on your risk level, you get a certain capital. So if you have a very risky business, it's fairly early stage, you don't have any proven record of cash flows, then you have to go for sort of seed money, angel investors, venture capital, private equity. But then when you become more mature, then you can actually come to the bank and get bank lending. So you just have to understand that depending on where you are in the development of your company and how much risk you're taking, you don't always have access to bank financing, because we have to keep our credit losses low so that we have low funding costs and therefore have a competitive lending rate to the companies we lend money to. So I think educate yourself on what kind of capital you can seek depending on what stage you're at in your corporate development.
And of course, you can also reach out for collaboration. I mean, there is a lot of actors in Team Sweden. I mean, you can have the experts on the ground in Business Sweden. You can also, if you're a large company, talk to SEK and EKN. There is an infrastructure in Sweden for this, right?
Yeah,
where
absolutely.
The commercial banks also, of course, have an important role.
Yeah, good self-promotion there.
Well, what can you do? What can you do? Okay, well, actually, I forgot my watch, so someone needs to help me. What time, Lotta? 26, okay, we have plenty of time. That's good news, because this is so very important and interesting. Let's go back to you, Viviane. You had so many interesting thoughts when we talked earlier. But I think if we go back to sustainability, I mean, it's obviously the theme that everything sort of bounce backs to. What do you foresee? You started to touch upon protectionism. Could there be a risk that the politicians in America sort of ends this for themselves because they are too eager to have American companies to do this on their own? Do you understand my question? It was a bit babbly.
No worries. No, I think, I mean, let's see. I mean, both the Infrastructure Act and IRA are both signed into law. So they have passed through Congress already. You can't really kind of upend them very easily. Then, of course, there are, ways to interpret these laws in different ways. There are a few kind of gray zones in there. So I think that, let's say we would have a shift in the White House. It's difficult to foresee what would happen, but I think that many of these larger green transition shifts that we're seeing, I would be surprised if they would start moving backwards, at least in some of the more progressive areas of the country. And I think this is also, it's important to know, we've talked about these huge green transition kind of trends that are sweeping over the country, but there's also a big sustainability divide where you have certain parts of the country where a lot of companies follow suit more for incentive reasons. There's money to get there. People follow the money. But there are also other parts of the country where it's actually makes a good business case. And kind of surprisingly, maybe Texas is one of those. Right now, we see a huge renewable energy trend in Texas because they have kind of cheap and easy accessible solar and wind. And so I think that, I think there are also even some voices from Europe that, maybe the US and North America is actually on their way to move past Europe at this time. Let's see about that. I think we have a pretty good head start, but there's some interesting movement going on.
Definitely. Jeanette, you touched upon it earlier, but this green transition, it's a movement who's going to fundamentally change societies. What role do you see that Swedish companies can take in a larger agenda where business leads to development of societies and big changes, big shifts like this?
Well, if I may, I would start with maybe a different take on it. And I know we're now discussing a lot of how do we come here and do business? How can we create more business? But if we take a step back, I think that also recognizing what we're bringing from a competence perspective, expertise perspective, and experience. And I think we are maybe in a little bit of a Swedish humble way. Sometimes we're underselling what we actually bring to the table. So if I look at the experience that Ericsson has in their sustainability, and we as an industry, the industry as such, we only stand for less than 1.5% of the carbon emission globally. So that's a very small part. But since we're such an important part of the total infrastructure that all of us are working with, if we work with our stakeholders and partners, we affect more than 15% of the carbon emissions. So when we set our net zero targets and we're looking at what we need to do, and Ericsson has done a tremendous work in this. 2030, we're going to be net zero in our own operations. 2040, it's going to be throughout our value chain. That is something that we can bring to our partners and customers here and tell them, this is the work we have done, and we will bring you in, and we can do this jointly. And I think also we have a great history in Sweden of working with academia. So many of these smaller companies comes out of the academia because there's such a close cooperation and collaboration in Sweden. And that, for example, is something I think that we can bring, and we see a lot in Canada and the US as well. We work with over 20 different universities here in Canada, making sure that the competence expertise we bring back into the academia, which of course comes back as extremely skilled competence into the company. And now we have AI hubs, we started up a quantum research hub, and we're doing that also together with Sweden. So I think we're bringing all of these experiences, and looping back to what Vivian said, we're also drinking our own champagne. So, for example, in Texas, Ericsson has our big North American factory for 5G equipment, and that factory is built 100% is running on solar energy, very practical in Texas, by all means, but we're also showing the operational efficiencies, which is something that when you talk to the customers and how you bring back business value to them, that's what they are looking at. And we're saying, well, actually, we have 75% higher efficiencies with our employees in that factory, and 65% less waste. So I think it's for us that when we talk about how we can work together, it's not about always just driving and what we believe is the business value as such, but everything else that we're bringing to the table for the US companies, or the Canadian companies, they can hardly get from anyone else. So we bring a lot of value beyond the business as such.
Tobias, what do you think when you hear what?
No, but in many ways I agree, and I think it's a reminder to all of us that what's happening in many ways is positive here. I mean, ultimately we're speaking about having a planet to walk on here, and the climate targets. And I think if you speak about our situation and the recent projects that we won, it's always about reducing the CO2 footprint and about the sustainability topic. And only one example is that we won this project, was awarded as Hitachi Energy, and actually exporting from Sweden to the US, which is a connection from Canada then to the New York City. And that project isolated is basically equivalent to taking out 44% of the cars in the city. So it's a massive CO2 footprint impact here. And I think that's ultimately what we have to remind ourselves about.
Back to you, Tobias. I mean, collaboration seems to be key here. Many of you have mentioned collaboration and also connection with academia and stuff like that. What do you think when you hear that?
Well, we have engineering teams based in the US as well. We realized quite early on that the autonomous functions being built out and companies in America is, well, they had a head start. So we're trying to grab as much of that competence, integrate that into our engineering as well. But another thing that caught my eye there was on the whole economics of sustainability. So not all our customers are super excited about the green future. They care about cost. And we need to be able to show to them that investing in these technologies is strategically important to be competitive long term. And that's what they are seeing. I think some of them are like, sure, it's also great that it's green, but in the end, we want to be competitive. So that's critical for us, being able to show that long-term opportunity, and that's driving a lot. And on like solar energy, I've read somewhere that about 70% of all new installed capacity in America is right now solar. So I mean, this is driven by the market. So it will happen independent of these subsidies. I do recognize some customers kind of saying, well, you know, there's a lot of money out there, let's grab it what we can. But I think more of them are looking at it even long term. I mean, this money will be around for some time, but not forever. So it's still a important question. Will this make us more profitable in the future? Mm-hmm. And that's the decision they're looking at. Mm-hmm.
And what's your take on it?
Well, of course, yes. We as a company, we're created to be the catalyst to make this happen, to show that the new business model is working and have others following us. And that's also what we're seeing. At this point, we're seeing massive investments into charging infrastructure for heavy electric trucks. We see that technology just going down in price, and I think it's not rocket science to figure out that there's a tipping point. And a lot of our customers looking into the future, they see if the tipping point is over there and everybody else is seeing that, when should we invest? Should we invest when the door is going to be small and everybody else is going in there, or should we invest earlier?
Let's ask Masi. When to invest and how have you adjusted? I mean, I think there must have been some sort of adjustment in your risk assessment, taking into consideration there is a lot of state aid out there, is a lot of subsidies. I mean, you need to evaluate every company, of course, but having a look at the broader picture.
Yeah, I mean, there are many aspects here. When it comes to legacy businesses, you have to think about stranded assets. Will this plant be sort of creating power in the future, or will that end at some point because of regulation or because there's no one that wants to buy those products because it's going to impact your own sort of emissions or sort of scope 3 emissions? So that's one part, sort of what are the assets that we thought we had as collateral worth in 5 or 10 years from now? And then obviously on the other side, you have maybe plants that haven't been built, a solar plant, but in the future, the value of that asset is going to appreciate, and we can use it as collateral and lend money against. So you have to make these assessments all the time. On the subsidies, sure, I mean, to the extent you think subsidies are temporary, it's difficult to include that in a credit assessment. You have to have this sort of see-through of sort of at least being partially sort of permanent so that you can use that in the cash flow analysis of the company. But I'm thinking that, I'm not an expert as you are, but the IRA should be good for Swedish companies as well, European companies as well, irrespective of you can use it, because it creates competition among governments and politicians to create subsidies everywhere. And in the end, it's just a transfer of money from taxpayers to corporates. Just be aware of that. There's someone in the end paying for this.
You're surprisingly outspoken, Masi. I love it. This was a very interesting perspective.
Yeah, I think even important thing even here in Europe, because there's of course a lot of criticism. But I mean, this is going to build scale in a lot of these economies or technologies, and that scale will drive down prices across the world. So I mean, this is going to be a great thing for the world as a whole, even though there's some temporary pain in a few ways. But I think that's also important to remember.
Definitely. Well, time flies. I think it's time actually for the final question, which is the same. I'm going to ask all of you to see if there are different perspectives. And back again to the opportunities in the North American and Canadian market. and the future of doing business in this market. What do you need to take into consideration to grasp the opportunities, and how does the forecast look like for the market, in your opinion?
Yeah, I kind of told it already, but again...
Say it again.
We see a huge opportunity. I mean, this is really boosting the market that was already strong to start with. We will strengthen the footprint. It's an opportunity to grab. I mean, subsidies we could debate about philosophically if this is good or bad, but the opportunity is there. And ultimately, again, it's about sustainability, and let's take that. Yeah, I see it extremely positive.
Yeah, I mean, the market we're targeting globally is about $4 trillion, and the US is a large chunk of that.
$4 trillion, that's pretty understandable how much money that is.
It really is not an understandable number, no. It's just huge. And I think when we started out the company, we got that question all the time around, I mean, when is autonomous driving going to be everywhere? And I think we realized we're going to need new types of vehicles to do this, fundamentally different from the ones we have today, built from a different viewpoint, and that means we're going to have to replace millions and millions and millions of vehicles. That takes a while. So there's huge opportunities there to remake this system, and what we're trying to do is, while remaking it, grasping opportunities of inefficiencies that's existed for a long time. Because especially in the logistics industry, you can see that it's still a pen and paper industry, even though the pen and paper has moved into an Excel sheet, basically. And there's a whole large opportunity for higher utilization and higher efficiency. And that's something software should have already enabled. But because of this new technology that people realize they have to change, that's a huge opportunity to take all the rest of the benefits that we should have already had and take them now.
No vacation for you this year.
No.
So, Masi, your and the bank take on doing business in the North Americas going forward. What you need to do and understand.
I mean, I think I would be positive as well. I mean, if you just take from a macro perspective, you have much better demographics than you have in Europe, for example. You have this innovation culture that's been there for a long period of time, just keeps on developing. And I think culturally it's a bit more positive than Europe. You typically in the North America in general, you celebrate people that are successful in a different way. You don't try to tax them what they're doing away, so you celebrate them in a different way. I think if you can import some of that culture in Sweden, that would be great. So I think the conditions are great. I guess the only negative is really the sort of political instability and polarization, which I think would create some concerns of, because back in the days where you had a shift in government in the US, didn't matter too much. Now it feels like it's a massive swing depending on whether you get a shift.
We don't even know what's going to happen after 24, so it's, yeah. That's the thing. Thank you. Jeanette, same question to you. I mean, obviously there is a huge, it's continuous business opportunities for Ericsson in Canada. What you need to understand and do being successful in business going forward in the market?
Well, several good things have already been mentioned by Tobias, Martin, and Thomas, but I think that maybe just other reflections. I mean, it's the scale. I think we talked about this, that, you know, we talked about demographic and the scale and the size of it. I mean, Canada is the second largest country in the world. It's just the demographic and opportunities there that we can scale in a different way than obviously it's very hard maybe to do in Europe, also with all the different cultures and governments, etc. So you have the skill that's easier. It is the competence that we bring. So once again, I will come back to that. We're bringing a lot of credibility in the space of sustainability, how we have applied it. Look at, you know, we were just announced here for Ericsson yesterday, we were top 10 of from Corporate Nights announcements, the top 10 of international companies. You know, the small little Sweden had, you know, Ericsson on top of the list there. That is a huge achievement. So these things, it all speaks on behalf of us. And thirdly, I would mention, I think, and maybe that's a little bit of a, you know, we can see that just on the stage and the panel here today, is that we're very good at being cross-industry. So telecom obviously is very much a basic and foundation to a lot of the communication. It's absolutely needed for the communication industry overall, for all these companies. But then, of course, we go into manufacturing and can see how can we help make sure that we create those efficiencies in manufacturing. Transport, like Thomas is talking about, is also something that would interact with other types of industries. And we're very good at that in Sweden. And I think we need to bring that experience to both the US and the Canada to really showcase how we can bring it all together, because that's really where you get the biggest impact from a sustainability perspective as well.
Thank you very much. And we're soon going to have some closing remarks by Janne, who is the CEO of Business Sweden. But before we have that, Vivian Gilman, you are the acting vice president for Americas, representing Business Sweden in this huge, fantastic market with a lot of opportunities going forward. You will have the final words. What do you need to know and understand to continue to be successful in the market as a Swedish company going forward?
Thank you. I think that we also need to, just as a backdrop here, need to understand that more than 20% of Swedish companies' global sales already go to this region. So it's a hugely important market for Swedish companies. And so Swedish companies have learned to become successful. And just like Jeanette was saying with Ericsson and the Global Citizenship Award, I think that there are many Swedish companies that have really proven themselves on this market already. And I think that some of the things that we're seeing is, maybe learning to balance between when to be Swedish and kind of lean on those typically Swedish characteristics like innovation and digitalization and technology, etc., and when to be local, which is potentially more in the way of doing business, as Thomas was saying. Also, it's a little bit more assertive in this part of the world. But if we look at the green transition, I think many of the offerings from Sweden for Swedish companies it's a perfect fit to the transition that's going on right here, right now. And so I think there's tremendous opportunity kind of across the board. If you look at some of these...
Sorry, Vivian, we need to wrap it up, even though I'm absolutely clear of that you had much more interesting things to say. So we need to wrap it up here, and we need to welcome... Please stay. Janne, Larsson, please join us on the scene. I mean, now we are coming towards the end of this time zone journey. Yes. The time zone journey that we had conducted during today. 22 guests moved around the globe, covered impactful hotspots like China, India, Middle East, Europe, and now North America and Canada. What is your overall reflections?
No, but just as Vivian said, the transition is a huge opportunity. It's naturally a huge threat to mankind and the planet, but it's also economically a huge opportunity. 4 trillion, whatever numbers you add in there, it's huge. And Sweden still is in the forefront of the ecosystems moving in this direction. So short-sighted, it is clear to me that from east to west, sustainability and climate-smart technology will dominate whatever happens the coming 5-10 years. In the long run, I think we need to start observing what is happening in demography, because there will be impacts from China reducing in 30 years, reducing its population by 300 million. At the same time, India continuing to grow. That will have effects that makes, I think, the geopolitical situation of today look easy to understand. So the difficulties in world trade will not go away. They will increase. It will be more difficult to do business internationally. That increases risks. On the other hand, the risks of not engaging in international trade and insight development will be even larger. So opportunities are there in sustainability. Opportunities are there in understanding where the world is heading. The risks are certainly there as well, but staying out of all of this is a much, much bigger risk than engaging in it. So be curious, be agile, and be active.
Great final words. Thank you so much, Janne, for having us and hosting this journey around the world. Thank you so much to the distinguished panel, both digital and physical. And thank you for watching.